The Chicago courtroom felt suffocating that November morning. Rain drummed against the tall windows as 12-year-old Maya Chen gripped the wooden railing separating spectators from the proceedings. Her knuckles had gone white, her dark eyes fixed on the man in the defendant's chair, her father, James Chen, who sat with his shoulders hunched, looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. "Mr. Chen," Judge Margaret Harrison's voice cut through the murmuring crowd, "you stand accused of embezzling $2.3 million from the Riverside Construction Company, where you served as lead architect for 8 years. The evidence against you is substantial. Before I deliver my verdict, do you have anything to say?" James Chen rose slowly, his suit wrinkled from sleepless nights. "Your Honor, I've dedicated my entire career to building structures that serve communities. I would never." "The financial records speak for themselves," the prosecutor, David Reeves, interrupted sharply. He was a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses, holding up a thick folder. "Wire transfers to offshore accounts. Falsified invoices. A vacation home in Lake Geneva purchased. During the same period funds went missing. The defendant exploited his position of trust to systematically steal from his employer and colleagues." Maya's stomach twisted. She'd heard these accusations repeated on the news, whispered by neighbors, shouted by her former friends' parents at school pickup. But they were lies. They had to be. "Your Honor." Maya's voice rang out before she could stop herself. Every head in the courtroom turned toward her. The bailiff moved forward, but Judge Harrison raised her hand. "Young lady, this is highly irregular," the judge said, her expression stern but not unkind. "You cannot simply speak out during pleas." Maya's voice cracked. "My dad is innocent. Everyone needs to know the truth." Judge Harrison's eyes softened slightly as she studied the desperate girl. "What is your name, child?" "Maya Chen." "James Chen is my father, and he didn't steal anything. He's the most honest person I know." Tears streamed down Maya's face, but her voice grew stronger. "He donates to homeless shelters. He volunteers teaching architecture to underprivileged kids every Saturday. He wouldn't even let me keep the extra $5 when a cashier gave us wrong change last month." The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, this emotional outburst, while touching, doesn't change the documented evidence. A child's faith in her parent, however admirable, cannot override bank statements and forensic accounting." "Mr. Reeves is correct," Judge Harrison said gently to Maya. "I understand your loyalty to your father, but the court must follow evidence and law, not sentiment." "I'm afraid." "Then look at the real evidence." Maya pulled a crumpled envelope from her jacket pocket, her hands trembling. "I found these in our attic 3 days ago. My mom doesn't know I took them. But my dad kept everything. He always keeps records of everything because he's careful and honest, and he knew something was wrong." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harrison leaned forward. "Bailiff, bring me that envelope." Maya handed it over, her heart hammering. Inside were photocopies of emails, handwritten notes, and printed spreadsheets covered in her father's meticulous annotations. As Judge Harrison examined the documents, her expression shifted from skepticism to intense concentration. The prosecutor approached the bench, and Maya watched them confer in urgent whispers. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, Judge Harrison looked up, her face grave. "Mr. Reeves, these documents appear to show that Mr. Chen discovered irregularities in the company's accounting 9 months before these charges were filed. According to these notes, he reported his concerns to." She paused, checking the papers. "To the company's CFO, Robert Winters, and to the board chairman, Gerald Hartman." James Chen's head snapped up, hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. The prosecutor's face had gone pale. "Your Honor, I was not aware of these documents. They were never disclosed during discovery, because Mr. Winters and Mr. Hartman are the ones who filed the charges against my client." James's defense attorney, Patricia Moss, interjected quickly. She'd been quiet until now, a methodical woman who'd been frustrated by the lack of hard evidence to support her client's claims. "Mr. Chen told me about these concerns, but we had no proof until now. He suspected he was being framed, but couldn't prove who had access to create false records in his name." Judge Harrison's jaw tightened. "Are you suggesting that the individuals who reported this alleged crime are actually the perpetrators?" Patricia nodded vigorously. "The evidence in that envelope shows Mr. Chen identifying the exact discrepancies that later showed up attributed to him. He documented warning the executives. Those warnings were ignored, or rather, used against him." Maya watched the prosecutor frantically flipping through his own files, his confidence evaporating. "Your Honor, I need time to review. This changes everything. If the complainants themselves are under suspicion." "Bailiff," Judge Harrison commanded, her voice sharp with authority, "please contact the U.S. Attorney's office immediately. And someone get Robert Winters and Gerald Hartman on the phone. I want them in this courtroom within the hour." She turned to James Chen. "Mr. Chen, please remain seated." This trial is hereby suspended pending an emergency investigation. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for their phones. The prosecutor's team gathered in frantic huddles. Maya felt her knees go weak, and her mother, who'd been sitting rigid with contained emotion, suddenly pulled Maya into her arms. "You found those papers," her mother whispered, her voice breaking. "How did you know to look?" "Dad's been so sad," Maya said, wiping her eyes. "Not angry, just sad. Guilty people get angry when they are caught. Dad was sad because no one believed him. So I knew there had to be something that proved the truth. Dad saves everything, so I looked everywhere until I found them." 3 hours later, Maya sat in the now quiet courtroom with her parents. Her father held her hand, his eyes red but clear for the first time in months. Across the room, she could see the prosecutors in intense discussion with federal agents who'd arrived shortly after Judge Harrison's calls. Robert Winters and Gerald Hartman had been brought in separately. Through the partially open door of the adjacent conference room, Maya could hear raised voices, the two executives now turning on each other, each trying to shift blame. Judge Harrison returned to the bench and gestured for James Chen to approach. Maya and her mother followed. "Mr. Chen," the judge began, her voice heavy with regret, "preliminary investigation confirms that the documents your daughter provided are authentic. The federal prosecutors are now building cases against Mr. Winters and Mr. Hartman for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. It appears they created false records in your name to cover their own crimes when you began asking questions." James Chen's voice was hoarse. "I knew something was wrong. But they had so much power, such good reputations. When they accused me, everyone believed them immediately. I'm issuing an order for your immediate release," Judge Harrison continued. "All charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You cannot be tried for these crimes again. The court extends its sincere apologies for the injustice you've suffered." She looked down at Maya. "Young lady, your courage and faith in your father likely prevented a terrible miscarriage of justice. Had he been convicted based on the fabricated evidence, the real criminals might never have been caught." Maya felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different, relief, joy, exhaustion all mixed together. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, Judge Harrison called them back once more. "Mr. Chen, Miss Chen, I've been on this bench for 17 years. I've seen hundreds of cases, heard thousands of testimonies. But I've rarely witnessed such unwavering faith and determination." She smiled at Maya. "You remind me why we have courts in the first place, not just to punish the guilty, but to protect the innocent. Never lose that conviction that truth matters." 6 months later, Maya stood in her father's new office. James Chen had been hired by a different firm, one that valued integrity, and had actively recruited him after news broke of his vindication and his role in exposing massive corporate fraud. The story had made national headlines. Embezzlement accusers were true criminals, architect's daughter saves father. But Maya didn't care about the headlines. She cared about how her father smiled again, really smiled. How he'd taught her to draw architectural blueprints last weekend. How their neighbors had apologized and welcomed them back into the community. "Thank you, sweetheart," her father said, pulling her into a hug. "I was losing hope. Everyone had given up on me except your mother and you. You believed when no one else would." Maya squeezed him tight. "You always taught me that the truth is like a building's foundation. It might get buried under dirt and debris, but it's still there, holding everything up. We just had to dig down and find it." James Chen laughed, wiping his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," Maya said simply. Through the office window, she could see the Chicago skyline, buildings her father had helped design, structures that would stand for generations. Just like the truth had stood, despite everything. Just like their family had stood, together through the storm, and Maya understood now what her father had always told her, that integrity wasn't about never being challenged. It was about standing firm when everything and everyone was against you, trusting that truth would eventually rise to the surface. The moral was clear, burned into her heart. When you know someone's character deeply, trust that knowledge even when the whole world doubts. Truth and innocence, like quality craftsmanship, will ultimately prove themselves if given the chance.